Hi, everyone, and welcome to tonight's Fall for Tufts session, Intro to Graphic Arts at SMFA at Tufts. Welcome. In this session, Chantal Zakari, professor of the practice in graphic arts and chair of graphic arts, print, paper, and photography, will present on the development of graphic arts from pre-industrial revolution through modernism. Very exciting. But before we begin, I'll remind you all that we have some really excellent programming coming up through Fall for Tufts in the coming weeks, including more sessions with amazing SMFA faculty, some student panels, and another portfolio workshop. You can register with the link that I'm about to drop in the chat. But without further ado, I will let Chantal introduce you all to graphic arts at SMFA.
Hi, everybody. Thank you, Julia. I can't see your faces, but I hope you're all well. I'm happy to be here with you all and happy to answer questions at the end of our talk. I am going to share my screen now so that we can look at the images that I want to share with you. Julia, just confirm that I'm okay.
Yes, looks great.
Okay, good. All right. So I am going to, let's see, how does this work? There we are. I am going to talk to you about the graphic arts area at the SMFA, where we cover knowledge in relationship to typography, printing, printed book arts and artist books, but also interactive web. A lot of our students do work that is socially engaged. A lot of our classes deal with the history of the graphic arts. We look at zines from the 70s and on. We look at street graphics. And of course, we also look at comics, which is an interest of a lot of incoming students. As you know, at the SMFA, the areas do not exist in isolation of each other. So if you are a student in the graphic arts, chances are you're also taking classes in print and paper, in photography, in painting and drawing. But if you're doing screen-based graphics, you might be working in video and film, animation, and digital media. Here I'm actually showing you work from Erica Sachs, who graduated a couple of years ago, just to give you a sense of how Erica was strongly grounded in the graphic arts area, but she also designed this whole vending machine and all the objects that goes inside the vending machine. So we see our practice as a very interdisciplinary practice. I'm going to give you a short introduction to the term graphic arts to kind of differentiate it from graphic design and to kind of explain further how we teach and what our teaching pedagogy comes from, where it comes from. So I'm going to start with the artist magician, the idea of who an artist is. And here the artist is represented painting an image inspired by her muse. The artist is a magician who creates visual illusions, and the closer to reality the image is, the more talented she's considered to be, right? The main objective in making this art is to reach an audience, to share her visual thoughts and expressions in public. In this particular example, the work is shared in a gallery, usually defined as a neutral space, far from outside distractions. The walls are white, the light is controlled, etc., right? Another hope is that the work will be preserved in an institution such as a museum, so that the work can continue to exist in context of the history of art and in relationship to other artworks of the time. Now, the funding of this practice is determined, the content of the work. In Europe, for example, in the past, it would have been a wealthy family like the Medicis. In this particular example, that would be a patron to several artists. The artist would be responsible for painting in service of the family and responsible for creating visuals that supported the family's wealth and political power. Or funding might come from an institution such as the church in Renaissance Europe, right, which commissioned many works for artists. In this case, the artist was responsible to promote the power and ideology of the Catholic Church. Or the work could be commissioned by the state, and the resulting pieces all have a clear reason to exist because of their mode of funding. All three of these examples are client-based projects, right? If your donor pays for your portrait, the idea in the piece goes beyond the artist's own opinions or feelings, they're bound to be responsible to the donor's need. Michelangelo, for example, did not need to be a believer, although he was a believer, but he did not need to be a believer to paint the Sistine Chapel. The subject of the painting was already spelled out for him. He needed to design it in an engaging and effective way, which he did, because even today, many people talk about being moved while visiting the chapel. All three of these examples exist to assert power for a particular group of people as wealthy and powerful and heroic, right? A lot about our understanding of art changed through the Industrial Revolution. Somewhere between 1750 and the turn of the 20th century, Europe and North America went through a great change with the invention of machinery, the establishment of factories, the development of industries, and mass production. So new social structures were created and a new working class was born. Most importantly for the artist, a new visual landscape and new tools emerged. And with that, our understanding of art and our expectations from an artwork changed. Here I'm going to put three thinkers that really affected artists because these thinkers actually defined art and its function in society. And they helped us understand how the place of art and the place of the artist in society was transforming. So John Ruskin, this gentleman with a beard, wrote about art, architecture, and craft. He talked about the authenticity in the handmade object in contrast to the machine-made object. Makes sense, right? Even today, we talk about how the handmade painting is more valuable than the machine-made. That would be photography, printmaking, or computer-generated images, right? Walter Benjamin, on the other hand, reflected on the idea that as art frees itself from rituals and production methods due to mechanical reproductions, it would now be able to focus on politics. So essentially, he's saying that if you do not have to worry about production methods, how well you're painting, or the effects, the special effects you're creating with handmade objects, the machinery will take care of image reproductions, then the artist can really focus on politics and the content of the work. So let's take William Morris as an example. And of course, I didn't mention Karl Marx, but I assume a lot of you are familiar with the Communist Manifesto that he wrote and how that affected society in general. But so let's take William Morris as an example. While in art school, Morris was painting in the style of Romanticism, which was the contemporary art ideology of the time, but he was exposed to Karl Marx and John Ruskin's philosophies. And when he graduated, soon after leaving school, he was designing fabric patterns and wall patterns instead of painting, right? He decided he wanted to make art in service of daily life, and this is where Karl Marx's ideas come in. Morris defined furniture, carpets, walls to be his art practice. Right? So now I'm going to talk a little bit about art and the relationship to technology. Another way art making was transformed was through new technologies. Machines were used for printing since the 1950s, since the 15th century. In this particular example, you see a printing press from the 15th century in Gutenberg, Germany. But this continues to the 19th century as technology progressed. And there were immense advancement. By the time you reach the 20th century, the printing press looks very different. And the printing of books and magazines and posters were part of everyday life. Along with the developments in technology on the printing press, more books were being printed and more experimentation in literature was taking place. So in France, Mallarmé, who did this particular book, talked about the way the words looked on the page and how this changed the meaning of the text. In response, some writers experimented with language and the visible word. And here you have Lewis Carroll, whom many of you might be familiar with, Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, where he typeset the tail of the mouse as literally a tail of the animal, right? The Italian poet Marinetti, this is about 20 years later, destroyed the structure of the page as we've known it for centuries. His page looked more like a painting than a page from a traditional book. He called his poetry Words and Freedom, rejecting history and tradition in order to start a new look for the future. The artists who called themselves the Futurists and who were primarily led by Marinetti's thoughts believed in making art for the present moment. So they rejected archives and museums and embraced cheap art of the moment, temporary art that was not going to last longer than the present. The printing press allowed Marinetti to publish cheap books and flyers. Today we call them zines, right? This was truly art for the people. Around the same time, artists started defining the work independently from process and craft. And so here I'm going to show you Marcel Duchamp in relationship to the painter from the 17th, 18th century, right? Partially because of new mechanical reproduction methods, the artist magician, remember this artist magician, is not how we measured art anymore. Instead, art is defined by its ideas rather than only its craft. So Marcel Duchamp admired the machine-made, the mass-produced, and let go of craft and the artist's hand. He called his sculptures ready-made. He recognized industrially designed objects as conceptual artwork. So another manifestation of technology was the photographic camera and the printing of an image in the darkroom, right? Photography had been around since the late 19th century, but Stieglitz was the first to define it as an art form. Here he has photographed the lower deck of a transatlantic ship while sailing from the US to Europe. We can look at the image formally and say that the image is defined based on a cubist aesthetic. I'll show you some really dynamic diagonal lines here. And even this guy looking directly at the camera creates another line, right? So aesthetically, this image is very sophisticated. But we also know that the people photographed in this image are immigrants to the US who had been turned away by officials because of having failed their financial or health requirements. They are sadly on their way back to Europe. In this case, art is being redefined aesthetically, but also based on its intention. The image is a documentation of an event and also carries deep political meaning. Let's also look at art education. So now I'm going to shift back into the art school, and especially the education of an artist whose practice is socially engaged, right? The basis of art used to be observing, seeing, and creating an image. But at the turn of the century, art schools included new machinery, and here I'm showing you a picture of the SMFA print shop. And new machinery and technologies were integrated to art schools over the years, and for the most part, graphic artists were really the first to embrace it, right? Modernist art education was reinvented with the Bauhaus. The Bauhaus was a German art school that ran between World War I and World War II. It was originally named the German School of Arts and Crafts. The school was funded by the government, so students would go to school for free. But with the economic crisis in Germany after World War I, there were no funds to support it, right? So after World War I, the Committee for Arts appointed a young architect, Walter Gropius, as the director of the school. Gropius moved the school to Dessau and worked with the municipality of Dessau to make student work relevant to the industry in order to generate funding for the school, right? What does that mean? It means that a student who used to be a typical sculpture student now would be creating objects that were then mass produced in the factories around the country. So this generated income both for the region and for the school. This was a transformation in art education into the creation of functional objects by students, thus the first design school, right? Walter Gropius changed art education at the Bauhaus. Instead of making an art sculpture, students were asked to create useful, quote unquote, useful art. This reconnected, as you remember, to a previous generation of artists who, under the influence of Marx, remember William Morris that I showed you as an example, wanted to make cheap and accessible art. But with the Bauhaus, this was now possible. Another student I'll show you as an example, Herbert Bayer. He was a student in the typography workshop at the Bauhaus, and later he became the director of the printing and advertising workshop. That's the department that he was in. The traditional print studio was transformed into an advertising workshop. The students experimented with printing technology, photography, typography, and they designed posters for events and publications and advertisements for products made by other students, right? So you can see now that the graphic arts have transformed into graphic design in service of a client. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about, oops, why am I not advancing? There it is, new employment for visual artists, right? This relationship of industry and employment and the arts. So the connection between fine arts and commerce was not entirely a new idea. I went back now 30 years from the Bauhaus. At the turn of the century in Paris, Toulouse-Lautrec is a very good example to look at. He painted scenes from the Moulin Rouge. Here it is. This is a painting, which was the wild nightclub where he hung out each night. And he also created advertisement posters for the Moulin Rouge, which looked very similar to his paintings. He did not distinguish between the two as art or commercial art, even though the intent of each one of these work was different, right? This is his own painting of La Goule, whereas this is the same exact kind of gesture. You would say you could recognize the same composition as well, but this is particularly an advertisement selling the Moulin Rouge. His posters were as famous as his paintings, and his client-based work blended with his gallery-based fine art work, right? So after World War II and the experiments at the Bauhaus, the relationship between an artist's self-initiated work and client-based work changed. And I put here an image of Mad Men because it's one of my favorite TV shows. It's probably before your time, but if you find old episodes of Mad Men, definitely watch it. Because during the economic boom of the 50s, especially in America, you see that growing corporations depend on the ad industry. And this is a captivating story of people working in an ad agency. Especially in the US, artists that had skills now are employed as illustrators, typographers, copywriters, photographers. Drawers and painters, for example, found jobs as illustrators, right? A capitalist economy created new careers for artists and redefined what it meant to be an artist. Commercial artists rarely practiced their own art, instead, exclusively made client-based work. Many art schools started graphic design programs. Sometimes this was part of the art department and sometimes part of the business school as advertising departments. Especially in art school, this created a dual philosophy. So students who were painters and sculptors developed their own voice and self-expression, while graphic designers were taught to satisfy client needs. Andy Warhol, he first enrolled in a pictorial design program in order to become an illustrator and worked several years as a commercial artist. He needed to make a living, and at school he acquired skills towards becoming a commercial artist. But in the 60s, many artists started using the tools of the graphic arts, photo reproduction and printing in order to create fine art. Warhol not only used the tools of the graphic arts, but also commented on images that were created by graphic technology to comment about modern life. Here, the picture of Marilyn Monroe multiplied 9 times to emphasize image reproduction in the media and was printed through mechanical reproduction. And so with that, I'm referring to Walter Benjamin's seminal essay, The Work of Art in the Age of Mechanical Reproduction, right? But also in our graphic arts courses, you often encounter Marshall McLuhan, who wrote extensively about media. Now, many artists were directly or indirectly influenced by these thinkers, And in the early 60s, Ed Ruscha trained a commercial artist and was making paintings and photographs. He also published a book of his photos, 26 gasoline stations, as he was thinking of creating cheap and democratic art objects. Instead of paying hundreds of dollars to buy a photo in a gallery, now you could get this book for $3.50. There was really nothing on the walls of the gallery. The book was the art object. It was not a representation of the original artwork. And it was not an exhibition catalog. This is the artwork, right? Similarly, another artist you might encounter in a graphic arts course at the SMFA is Art Spiegelman, who interviewed his father, a Polish Jew and a Holocaust survivor, and turned it into one of the first graphic novels, Mouse. In this story, the Jews are the mice and the Nazis are the cats. This is a very inventive way to reach a specific audience and the retelling of a personal story, right? It's like an artist book. Teens who are already prone to reading comics now can pick up Mouse and learn about World War II. A graphic novel opens the door to reaching new audiences. The 70s punk scene and 90s feminist groups use zines widely. These are cheap productions, ephemeral publications that can be freely distributed. In fact, the first zine published in the UK was distributed in a laundromat, not a gallery. And here I want to remind you of also Marinetti and his ideas of creating a cheap publication. In graphic arts courses at the SMFA, we also look at artists taking over the billboard medium, making art in public spaces. Here is John Lennon and Yoko Ono, who installed a billboard in Times Square in 1969. The medium itself is the billboard. There is no painting, there is no photograph. It is the billboard, and the medium is just as important as the message. Right? There has been new institutions that were created to support artists working outside the gallery space. In this case, the Public Art Fund of New York, which began in the 80s, supported the work of Barbara Kruger. Kruger, like Warhol and Ruscha, was also trained as a graphic designer in art school, right? I'm showing you here another example of community-based art. Paul Grover, together with the residents of Ithaca, New York, developed Ithaca Hours, an alternative payment system that has been created to preserve the local economy. So these bills would not work at a Starbucks, but instead at the local coffee shop in Ithaca. So if you get paid in Ithaca Hours, you're supporting the local economy. Another great public art project, community-based art project, is Conflict Kitchen, which is a restaurant that only serves cuisine from countries with which the United States is in conflict. This is around 2010. The restaurant rotated its identity every few months in relation to current geopolitical events. And the artist John Rubin also developed a menu and a historical booklet that goes along with the kitchen itself. Each restaurant had a different printout. Many artists started using the internet as a medium to make internet-based art, or net art, or screen-based art, or web art. There are many different ways of calling this. This is a piece by Future Farmers, which is based on direct data collected from the internet about Fortune 500 companies and their board of directors. And as you click on each name, you see the hidden connections between the board members and the companies. So I'm giving you a little bit of a sense of the amount of artists that you might be seeing in graphic arts courses. I'm going back to this list that I showed you at the beginning of the talk, but I want to also show you the kind of courses that we're teaching. These are not courses that are offered every semester, but it's our entire curriculum: introductory, intermediate level classes, and advanced level classes. We have quite a lot of classes that are typography based, and that provides you the basis for a lot of the work we do. We start actually with a course called Graphic Arts Toolbox. It's design, production, and alternative strategies for artists. So here you kind of rotate between print and screen-based art. And then you can move into the print-based publication and narrative section, or you could go into screen-based graphics or graphics in public space. And many of our students actually crisscross, mix and match. So for example, if you are in creative activism in emerging technologies, you might also want to take Mass Appeal Glossy Magazine, where we create a magazine, and so on and so forth. So you really create your own curriculum along with maybe a photo class, maybe a printmaking class. I'm going to show you some student work here. And this is Tori and Gus, who did a poster on masculinity. This is from the Spring Catalog 2017. And you'll see that there is 1, 2, 3 different ways of proving your masculinity, very tongue-in-cheek. Ezekiel Navarro did redesign the Prada logo. It's a fictitious Prada educational institution and Kanye West medical company. Amanda Kim designed coffee cups with Greek gods, referring to Starbucks. This is Eva, who published her own newspaper. Joe Chalmers, who had their own zine and comics. Sarah Kroll, who did a really large kind of children's book using her Barbie collection called Boys Will Be Boys. And it's the story of a little boy who actually recognizes his own identity crisis in kindergarten. So it's a great children's book. Freya Gupta did a board game on mental illness. I mentioned the magazine class a little earlier. This is what the magazine class published, was called Pulp. And it's a very collaborative project where no one owned really the pages, but there were, again, great articles. Some articles were written in AI, a lot of comics. You see a puzzle, a lot of advertisement, fake advertisement. And many of our graduating students actually get to publish their own books. Freya Gupta did a book about her grandmother. Raya Chek here about breakdancing and the Cambodian community. Annabelle Mead, her book Fracticize has a lot to do with the toxicity in the soil, and she's paralleling that with the story from the Bible of Cain and Abel. Joy Bedford, who combined a photo book aesthetic with a comic book aesthetic to talk about slasher movies and created her own story. We regularly participate in the Boston Art Book Fair. We had 2 tables last year and a lot of sales, so that was a great way for our students to have a show of their book and sell their book and reach a direct audience. And I'm going to leave you with this last project by Ethan LeBlanc. He did this last year. One day I came out of a Medford classroom and I found my car had a ticket. I was totally surprised, but when I looked carefully, I received actually the first ticket that Ethan had designed that said, "You look great today. I believe in you. Nothing can stand in your way." That was a ticket for happiness.